It's a really legitimate question about the Philadelphia Eagles. And most people, you're truly included, have been more critical of the defensive line and the defensive secondary. And Seth's point today was that, it really is both. It's not just one that's making it worse on the other, that the secondary isn't great and the defensive line isn't great, and they're kind of causing issues for each other. And I thought that was an astute and on-point point of view, which not enough of us have taken. Because, yes, I was off on Monday. Comcast kind of pulled the plug on us. I thought we had 15 minutes of good Eagle conversation.
It was ramping up, too.
It's still up there on the site if you want to go check it out. We plan on giving you the full 2 hours today. No internet breakdowns. We'll see. Cross our fingers. You never really know. It's out of our control. Yeah. But John McMullen and Jody McDonald planning on being here for you for the next couple hours. And we'll mainly deal with the Broncos and Eagles coming up on Sunday. It might be a point or two left over from the Thursday matchup, and certainly the overall opinion that we have on the Philadelphia Eagles and the direction they're going is what we're going to do. Be talking about for the next 2 hours. Johnny Mac, you didn't get a chance to talk Eagles significant guys at practice yesterday, a larger list on those that did not participate in yesterday's practice. Precautionary, or should we have some worries here about the game coming up against the Broncos on Sunday?
A little bit of both, I think. Obviously, throughout the season, they've gone through this with Fletcher Cox and Lane Johnson, Jason Kelsey. Those guys are just resting, trying to get them through practice, through the season. We're at that point. I mean, week 10, you're going to be banged up. So a lot of guys didn't practice, as you mentioned. Avonte Maddox, Darius Slay got injured against the Chargers, so that was no surprise. We knew Josh Sweat was going to be in the concussion protocol. I do think there was a positive. Darius Slay talks. He's first. He's the leadoff hitter every Wednesday when the players talk, and he did speak. So that, to me, is a really good indication that he plans on playing. So that's one positive note. And then the surprise, I think, was Rodney McLeod showing up and didn't practice, had a neck injury. So that's one you have to keep an eye on, I think. That's the biggest one. And Devontae Smith showing up with a little bit of an elbow was limited, but he's going to play. So just the normal banged up situation after 10 games in the NFL, after 9 games, I would say.
Get it with the veteran guys. This is not anything new. This goes back to previous Eagles coaches, that when a guy gets to a certain age and experience, that they go easy on him if there's any kind of nick or anything. Shoot, sometimes a guy's probably 100% healthy and they don't even participate, and it is purely a rest day. Both Cox and Hargrave out of yesterday's practice completely. We know Fletcher's getting up there, Hargrave a little bit younger. The Eagles defensive line, rightfully so, is coming under some pretty good scrutiny because they haven't been productive for the last 5 weeks, except for the one big week against the woe-begotten Lions. They really haven't done anything. Anything to read into Hargrave and Cox both being out on the same day of practice?
No, that's the way it has been. In fact, from Javon's perspective, he showed up on the injury report a couple of weeks ago as banged up. So it's the same type of thing. They're trying to get him to the game as healthy as possible. But I do think it's indicative of, look, that guy was playing like an all-pro for the first month of the season in anything but for basically the last month. So you have to wonder, is that shoulder hampering him a little bit more than has been let on? So he's trying to play through it. And I always talk about players, that's why coaches have tremendous respect, because, if guys play through things like that and Javon Hargrave presses through and he doesn't look as good and he starts taking some hits, but he's doing something for his team, and you don't add that context into it, sometimes they take a lot of of hits. And I think you're seeing that with that defensive line, with him particularly. And he hasn't been good the last few weeks. And the only thing I can come up with is that shoulder injury. I don't think he's healthy.
His shoulder is certainly a distinct possibility. The other one is, and you need to watch the All-22 and the breakdown of exactly how things are going, not something that an Eagle fan can pick up on a Sunday broadcast over the air network. How much is he actually being double teamed? A lot was made when Fletcher Cox wasn't making plays early in the season and Hargrave was getting to the quarterback, getting sacks and the like. Well, they double team Fletcher on every play. That Fletcher's always facing a double team. But everyone knows he's one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. So the opposition makes sure that they're not going to get beat by Fletcher Cox, which kind of opens things up for Hargrave. After Hargrave was up in the leadership of sacks after 4, 5, or 6 weeks of this season, certainly the other team's got to notice that when they're breaking down film. And so we got to give this guy respect, and we got to make sure he doesn't beat us. Do you think there's some of that if you're looking for that swing guy who's going to get the double team duties on someone along the Eagle offensive line, has it been more Jason Hargrave than it was earlier in the season?
Yeah, definitely more. I would still say Fletcher gets more of the sliding protections than Javon does, but it's certainly amped up. It's closer than it was at the start of the season. But I think that's going to start to change back if Javon continues to perform the way he's performing. I think the biggest issue has been in the run game. Where he's graded out as really one of the worst defensive tackles in the league, which is a bit of a surprise, again, because he came in from Pittsburgh, and that was more of his reputation than anything else. So that's why you kind of, when these weird kind of things happen, you start looking for reasons, and it's the only reason I can come up with. I mean, when you're trying to occupy blockers and trying to stop the run, you need your shoulders as a powerful defensive tackle. And he's trying to get through it. He's trying to play through it. And I think it's affected his play.
And one of the things we do each and every single Monday this week, we were going to do it on Tuesday. I'm sure you and Jeff Kerr did it somewhat on Monday, is to analyze the snaps that each guy gets. They're not cutting back on Fletcher and Hargrave snaps. You're seeing very few spots in there for the Milt Williams, Hassan Ridgways. They're leaning on their two top defensive tackles a lot. So that's why I'm not sure. And they're not going to tell us. We just have to try and do our own best guesstimating and try and judge things like skipping practice on a Wednesday as to how injured a guy like Jason Hargrave is. They're not showing that he's playing with injury by the number of snaps they're asking him to play, JM.
No, and he's not going to make excuses. He hasn't brought it up. And that's why I said that's a lot of times, when coaches respect players, that's one of the reasons, that's one of the gold stars, so to speak, because if they think that your backup, in this case, it would be, as you mentioned, probably in Javon's more Hassan Ridgway, who's not played well either. The thought process is probably even Javon at 80%, you make up a number, is better than Hassan Ridgway, and he's going out there and performing instead of saying, look, I'm not, comfortable with the way I'm playing up to my level, and you could say, I just can't go. So coaches tend to have a lot of respect for players like that, and they should. But yeah, it's one of those. Well, we talk about grades a lot, and player grades and Pro Football Focus. It's one of those things where it's a really big fly in the ointment, because nobody knows what someone's going through. Now, when it's evident and people are missing games and they're hurt, but there's so many players in this league that play through injuries that really affect their performance, and they're playing through injuries because their coaches think that they have a better chance to win, even with them at a lesser optimal, performance from a health standpoint. And it affects their play on the grade. And I bring up Javon for a specific reason, because he was so good in the first 3-4 weeks of the season.
Yep.
And then it's fallen off the table. So it's not like the guy forgot how to play. It's not that the guy lost his talent. And there's got to be something. And I can't come up with anything other than the injury.
And probably is significant injury, but I think the other teams have gotten wise and given them a little bit more attention. So I was watching NBC Sports Philly before I came on this morning on their Sports Center-like show. And on Wednesday, they do a feature, Ready, Set, Go, with our buddy Seth Joyner. Comes on and gives an Eagle analysis middle of the week, looking back at the previous game and looking ahead at the next game. And he made a point that's been well talked about for decades here in the National Football League. The combination of critiquing a team's defense with the defensive line and the secondary, and how sometimes the secondary can make a defensive backfield look great, or a defensive backfield can make a defensive line look great, and vice versa. Whether one could be struggling and the other one ends up paying the price. And it's one of those chicken and the egg, which comes first? Is the defensive line hurting the defensive backfield, or is the defensive backfield making it look like the defensive line isn't producing? It's a really legitimate question about the Philadelphia Eagles. And most people, yours truly included, have been more critical of the defensive line than the defensive secondary. And Seth's point today was that, it really is both. It's not just one that's making it worse on the other, that the secondary isn't great and the defensive line isn't great, and they're kind of causing issues for each other. And I thought that was an astute and on-point point of view, which not enough of us have taken. Have the Eagles given up the big play in the secondary? No, they have not.
No.
That's the design of Jonathan Gannon's defense, is to make sure that they don't give up the big play. But they give up play after play after play after play after play. I don't have to restate the 80% completion of the quarterbacks, do I? Well, that's the cornerback's job, is to keep that from happening. Get your hand in and defend the pass every once in a while. They don't, because there's a lot of cushion in that zone defense on the outside. Now they've got a couple of guys who ended up hurt last week, but look at it. You just said Slay said he's a go for Saturday for sure, for Sunday for sure against the Broncos. Have we, I don't want to say under critiqued, well, yeah, I do, under criticized the Eagles secondary, specifically all three of the cornerbacks, including Maddox in the slot? Have we given them a little bit too much of a break and just chalked it up to, well, that's Gannon's defense, and they're doing a job. They're just not giving up any big plays, so that's them getting it done? Or is it really, John?
No, I pretty much said I think the cornerbacks have been probably the biggest surprise on this team as a whole, more than. And by the way, just real quick on Darius, he didn't say he was going to play. That was just because he talked on Wednesday. That's a good sign to me that he's going to try to play. But I just wanted to clarify that. But I think the corners have been really, really good. And I expect that out of Darius, but I didn't expect it out of Steve Nelson and Avonte Maddox. I think they've done better than expected. So when you come into the season and say, okay, who's underperforming, who's overperforming, I would put those two guys in the overperforming from what I thought they would be category. TJ Edwards did a great job on this, talking about this yesterday, and wrote about it for Sports Illustrated. He kind of put it on himself and the linebackers. Now, when you're playing the philosophy, so you can kill the philosophy and people, feel free. But when you talk about in the philosophy, what they're trying to accomplish, and the defensive line is not able to get home because the ball's getting out in, 2 seconds, and the first read is always there. But Jonathan Gannon is telling his cornerbacks, all right, the quickest way to get beat is the ball going over your head. So you're limiting explosive plays. You're accomplishing that part of the defense. So who's got to take away those first reads in that zone coverage? It's got to be the linebackers. And the linebackers are probably the weakest point of this team. So there's kind of a two-pronged thing here. You can kill the defensive coordinator and say, why are you putting so much on the plate of linebackers that aren't very good, to be honest. And that's fair. That's a fair critique. But if you're just talking about what's going on the field and you're saying, okay, who's not doing their job? I think first and foremost, it goes to the linebackers. Now it's been a little bit better now that TJ Edwards is in there. But that's only really 2 weeks. And then the safeties after that, who have performed pretty poorly, with the exception of Marcus Epps. You know, I was thinking about this. I was talking to some other reporters, and I said the best linebacker on this team is TJ Edwards, and the best safety has been Marcus Epps. Nothing against those two guys. But, you know, that's not Ray Lewis and Ed Reed. Let's put it that way. So you're up against it from a personnel standpoint in the back seven. So where I think people are valid in their criticism, I don't think they're necessarily valid in their criticism of Jonathan Gannon. Where they could be is he's got to realize that and say, all right, I got to do a better job of not asking whether it's TJ or Alex Singleton or Davion Taylor. Ask him not to do things they can't accomplish, and they're not going to accomplish anyway. So I got to figure out a better way to do that. And, you know, they're playing the Denver Broncos this week, Jody. Now, you look at the Denver Broncos. I got to tell you, they just traded Von Miller. We all know Von Miller, tremendous player. He's gone. You know, Justin Simmons is really good safety. That's a top 10 defense, and that's a top 10 defense in basically every single category. I mean, amazingly consistent. And they don't have a lot of stars on that defense. You look at the names and you go, how the hell is Vic Fangio accomplishing this with this group? And we'll talk a little bit about that later in the show with somebody on the inside, because I'm interested. Because I look at the names and I go, this is stinking impressive. So I think that's where people should focus the criticism on Jonathan Gannon. But if I look at what the players are being asked to do, I think the corners have overperformed.
Okay, and you need, again, game film to be able to see how far they're backing off on every single play and giving cushion and allowing the receivers to make plays and then being reactive rather than proactive. If you tell me that, hey, they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do, Darius Slay and Nelson and Maddox, at least, it seems to me, maybe that's because the position that he's playing, the slide, he gets his hands on the ball every once in a while. And I think he's a better tackler than either Nelson and or Slay. So that's why if I was just using my own evaluation to grade out the cornerbacks, I actually think Maddox has been the best cornerback on his team this year. But there's a lot that goes into that. Yeah, Jonathan, get him up and start to play some press. Have we not seen enough? I know there's an overall philosophy. I know he comes from the Zimmer tree, and that's the way Zimmer has played for a lot of different years. But at some point, and
well, that's the ironic part. No, it's really not. Zimmer is always one of the more aggressive defensive coordinators. You know, he's, you know, the blitz doctor, whatever you want to call it, the A-gap guy, the overload blitz guy. But again, he's had the one player, you know, Gannon always tell me was the linchpin to Zimmer in Minnesota is Anthony Barr. And he's a really smart player. He's a really athletic player. You know, trade standpoint, I don't know. He's 10th pick in the draft, really high draft pick, really good player. Defends the run, defends the pass, great pass rusher. You can move them all over, chess piece, and then he's got Harrison Smith on the back end. So Jonathan talked about this when he was talking about pre-snap disguises. I asked him the question. He was specifically talking about Harrison Smith. He mentioned Minnesota. He was talking about a safety being on the line of scrimmage and rotating back. They do that in Minnesota because they got a guy who can do it when he's not on the COVID list. They don't have people who can do that kind of stuff here. So it goes into the more of the cloud coverage the shell philosophy, and then you get, Seth's talking about defensive line. There's always a blend. He's right about that. There's a blend of personnel and scheme, and the personnel on this team is not ready for any scheme. Look, you've heard this, Jody. I'm sure you get it on WIP. I'm sure you get the calls. I'm sure you get all of that, and saying this is the worst defense in Eagles history. So I went back. This defense isn't worse than last year's defense. They're slightly better. Slightly better. It's like 363 yards a game down to 355, 26 points down to 24 points. Not great, just better than last year's, which obviously the train fell off the tracks last year. You want to be much better than last year. But my point is, it's not even worse than last year's defense. And then you look at the NFL as a whole, where they are, they're ranked 15th in the NFL in defense. 15th. That's there's 32 teams in this league. Now, it's worse points per game. It's 20th. It's not great by any stretch of the imagination. But those people with those kind of criticism, they're just over the stinking top. I mean, they don't know what's going on in the NFL as a whole.
Here's where my critique lies of Jonathan Gannon. If you and Gannon said this, and I tip my hat to him when he said it. The problem is he hasn't lived up to his own words. That he wanted to build a defense, scheme-wise, philosophy-wise, that got the most out of the attributes that his players had. That he wasn't going to come in and just put his system in place and make the square peg fit the round hole. And I think that's the best way to have success in the National Football League, is to be able to evaluate your talent correctly and mold a scheme that not only gives you what you want and you stay true to your core tenets and values, but also gives the players the chance to do what they're capable of doing, not asking them to do something they can't do. The whole Minnesota comparison thing, put a safety up on the line and still be able to get back on the back end and cover. If they don't have that type of safety, you don't do that, which Jonathan Gannon doesn't, and good for him in that way. But Darius Slay and Steven Nelson, I think both are guys who are capable of playing man-to-man press coverage. I think they're both of that level that you can do it. You're going to get burnt once in a while. Everybody does. You live by man-to-man press coverage. You're going to die by man-to-man press coverage every once in a while, too. Giving up a 60-yard touchdown is not going to end the season. If you can actually get some 3-and-outs, where you get on a third down, a tipped pass, a hand on a ball, knock it out of the receiver's hand. Oh, my God, they've got a punt. You mean they don't get 4 first downs in a possession? I think you got to be able to mix that in. And to this point, Jonathan Gannon hasn't done it. He did it against the Lions because the Lions
He did it against the Lions. He did it against the Chargers. They played more single high against the Chargers than any other time this season. More blitzes against the Chargers than any time this season. Didn't work. So nobody noticed. Happened more early in the game than late in the game, and that's because they lost Avonte Maddox and then Darius Slay as well. So all these things come into it, but I think you hit the nail on the head, Jody. People have a problem with the philosophy, and we talked about Philadelphia forever. They want blitzing. They want Buddy Ryan. They want Bud Carson. They want Jim Johnson. They want a more aggressive style of defense. That's what it comes down to. They want blitzing. But I also know, and you know, because you've been in this town longer than me doing this, I also know that when they get blitzing and it doesn't work, look at the double moves and Jalen Mills, who I thought was, if anything, an overachiever that this town should have loved. And a lot of people did. I'm not crucifying everybody. When he would get killed on those double moves, they would just say, that's awful. You can't do that. Blah, blah. You can't win. I mean, the only thing that wins in critics' mind is success and winning football games and putting the best defense on the field. They're far from the best. They're also far from the worst. And I think that's kind of lost. And when you add in, if I say TJ Edwards is the best linebacker on the Philadelphia Eagles, I think everybody agrees with me now. Go find another team in this league that doesn't have a linebacker better than TJ Edwards. Nothing against TJ. And when I say Marcus Epps, now people will argue and say, no, Rodney McLeod's better. I'm saying this year, Marcus Epps has been the Eagles' best safety and really deserves to be on the field more, if anything, than else. Now, I'm not talking about the past or anything of that nature. Same type of thing. Go around the league and find me a team that doesn't have a better safety than what the Eagles can put out there. Whoever you want to describe is the best safety on this team. Look at Denver, Justin Simmons and Kareem Jackson. I mean, there's a personnel issue here, and Howie Roseman is going to be at Pitt, North Carolina, to look at the quarterbacks. I don't know if there's any defensive players on those two particular teams. I don't delve into the draft that much.
Neither one of them are great defensive teams. I can tell you right now. Well,
he better start looking at some stinking defensive players, because it's been a while since this team has drafted an impact defensive player.
All right, we'll come back. I want to follow up with what John was just talking about more specifically linebacker. We'll talk safety too, but the linebacker position. There's a history of it here in Philadelphia, and it predates Howie Roseman and Joe Bat. You can go all the way back 30 years.
Yeah, Jerry
30
Robinson.
Years since the last time they took a linebacker in the first round. Like, not one, not two. As of right now, 3 first-round draft picks. And John continues to say, and I got to admit, I agree with him. Chances are they're not going to take all 3 guys. It depends on where they fall. They may end up trying to move one and be able to get a future first and another secondary pick added to it. But the minimum of 2 first-round picks, could one of them actually be linebacker in this year's upcoming draft? I'll talk about that with Johnny Mack coming back. He did mention a little later in the show. We're going to have a buddy of mine on. Brandon Cristal is a reporter anchor for KOA out in Denver. He's been covering the Broncos for the last several years. Good dude, knows his football inside and out, and is very tied in to the Bronco organization. Brandon's going to join us in hour number 2. We'll come back with more here on Birds 365 in just a minute.